This is the Lightning Junkies podcast with your host, Chaz Cryptocent. On this episode of the podcast, we have Lightning Koala, and we're mostly talking about Lightning gaming. We touch on things like different pitfalls that you can run into if you're new to Bitcoin or crypto generally. And we also talk about the different games that Koala developed over time, as well as what they're doing nowadays. I'm not going to spend a long time talking in this intro today. If you're interested in supporting me, just go ahead and contact me on Twitter or Keybase, and I'll let you know the best ways to support me. For now, let's go ahead and jump into this episode and see what Lightning Koala has to say. I would like to go ahead and welcome Koala to the Lightning Junkies podcast. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm great. Nice to be here.
Glad that you joined me here on the podcast. On these things, I like to start it, in a very basic way and just have you, kind of tell me your general background, preferably before you got into Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I got into Bitcoin around 2014, but just bought some Bitcoin after watching Andreas's talk on the Canadian Senate. Slowly got into reading more about it, the financial and the technical side, then got to where I am nowadays, working at River.
Okay. What were you doing before you found Bitcoin?
I was working as a software engineer for a company based out in China that was doing educational e-learning, e-learning platform.
Okay. After you found Bitcoin, what shape did your interest take?
Initially, it was mostly just speculative because I was interested in financial markets, and I was looking at where Bitcoin was at in terms of the market cycle, and I think it was after the Mt. Gox implosion, so everything was kind of going down into a bear market, and then this idea of where does our money come from kind of led me down a rabbit hole.
Got it. Okay. Would you say that the economic portion of Bitcoin was what brought you in initially, even before the technology portion?
Yeah, I would say so.
And then how did things go from there?
I remember at some point I got hardware wallet, and then at some point I got that 21 computer. Oh, but actually before that, I think most Bitcoiners have a nightmare story of some money they lost back in the day, or something stupid they did back in the day. And I think mine was, there was this company called BTC Jam who did loans. I think I put some Bitcoin in there, not much, but that kind of went tits up. So that was my stupid decision back in the day. Well, there was more than one, but that's probably one that I thought of right now. Yeah, I got the 21 computer because I thought, I want to start getting my hands dirty. And my background before software was in electronic engineering, and I like just messing around with hardware. So I thought that was an interesting thing to get. But now it's mostly just a paperweight. But it helps me. But actually, I met a couple of people through the Slack channel they had, and that was actually how I eventually got to work in the industry, which was something that I really wanted to get into. So before that, I was not working on Bitcoin, and then afterwards, I managed to before I was working in a company not exactly related to Bitcoin, but sort of in the field, and then just managed to kind of gradually bring myself closer to working just on Bitcoin.
Got it. For our listeners that may not know what the 21 Bitcoin computer was, do you want to give them a brief rundown on what it was?
Yeah, so it was a Raspberry Pi Model 2B, maybe, with a mining chip plunked onto it. And the idea was that it could happen one day, but it was probably very premature. But it's this idea that mining will become commoditized enough so that everybody can run a miner at home. Your fridge can be a miner, your toaster can be a miner, and you have a very small amount of hash power, but that's enough to get a couple of sats. And back then, I think they had this variation of a mining pool that they used. Can't remember what it's called. And then there was also an API or SDK that you can work on to build stuff with. So there was a couple of people building projects on that thing.
21.co ended up becoming earn.com that later on Coinbase purchased. At the time, I remember finding it very interesting. I didn't buy one of the Bitcoin computers because I found it kind of expensive. I was like, that's kind of interesting. They're probably going to go places and we're going to have, ASICs and toasters and, we're not going to have anyone mining in China anymore, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously that didn't happen. Going back to what you said a moment ago about how, you had one of your big mistakes with getting into Bitcoin was BTC Jam. I actually had a very similar experience, not with BTC Jam, but a very similar service with peer-to-peer lending with Bitcoin. I ended up losing Bitcoin doing that. Do you know of any other pitfalls that, taking a quick tangent here, that anyone currently could, run into and possibly lose their money? Maybe cloud mining might be one of them, but I'm not sure how popular that is nowadays.
Oh, wow. I think there's a ton. I was listening to the Missing Crypto Queen podcast recently, and like the whole story around OneCoin and like the amount of people who got, I think there's probably more of those nowadays than there was back in the day. I think it's just this more generalized problem of like this information age that we have now, that there's a lot of noise. Picking out the signal amongst the noise is a skill that I think future generations, like the future human, to get really good at, basically. I think there's just like so many, like all the shitcoin wallets and applications which are nefarious and might steal your keys. I think there's a lot of things a lot of pitfalls for new users.
Would you agree that maybe the reason that we fell into the pitfall that we did is because we had some kind of greed motive that overrode our critical thinking here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't think greed is necessarily a bad thing. I don't know if it's lack of good educational resources. I think we're like part of a generation that, like the fiat generation, that didn't really get a good education with regards to money and things like that growing up. At least I speak for myself. The school system I was brought up in didn't really teach you about how to take out a loan, or like how to do a budget, or how does money work, where does it come from. Like all those things have kind of been like ignored. And so I think that's part of the reason why then, you come out into the world and then you're kind of more susceptible to these kind of things. I don't know if comparing it with like pyramid schemes and things like that is the right comparison, but perhaps there's something there, because you can also say that those are also driven by greed, right? And that's like a very common thing in society. So yeah, I don't quite know the answer to that.
Let's go ahead and move on, kind of move down your story here. Later on, I'm assuming your interest got you a job in Bitcoin land. What exactly was that?
I started working for a company called TokenSoft. It was actually a token sale platform. I mean, it was related to Bitcoin to the extent that, we ran a node and like we accepted Bitcoin as payments, but then we also accepted not a lot of other coins. I think just a couple more. But it was mostly based around like Ethereum, smart contracts, and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean that was like my first step into the industry, let's say. But I think my interests, even throughout that tenure, was mostly around Bitcoin. And even though I learned a lot, I was really interested in running a Lightning node, which I did with the CTO at the time. And yeah.
So you mentioned Lightning there. When did you first get into Lightning, to kind of give us a frame of reference here?
It was around, so I started reading about it and just researching before January 2017, but I think January 2017 was when we ran that node. It was like the TokenSoft node, and it was like really early back in the day. I can't remember how many nodes there were. It was like a couple of dozen, I think. Yeah, that was the first thing. And then that eventually led into me like building Satoshi's Place.
Okay. And do you want to go ahead and go into that? Because I feel like that's a good next step.
Yeah, like I guess I was and I am like super excited about Lightning. And initially I started thinking about gaming. I started thinking about, could you build a game like Street Fighter where like you're punching somebody and then that causes some Satoshis to fly back at you. Just kind of thinking through that problem, realized that, okay, it's not as simple as I thought. And eventually I landed on just wanting to build something that allowed people to experience technology like in a very immediate way. Even back then, in that first quarter of 2017, there was like a couple of wallets coming out. In my mind, I was like, well, somebody's going to download a wallet. They're going to open a channel or whatever. And then what? They're going to want to do something with it. And so I thought, okay, well, wouldn't it be nice to have an application that you can just go on, like draw a couple of pixels, get an invoice for it, and just pay for that. And so Satoshi's Place was born out of that idea of having something that you could just like very easily and very cheaply experience Lightning. And obviously it was inspired by the $1 million homepage, which I didn't actually know about. I only knew about the Reddit Place experiments, which happened the year before, which was kind of similar, but
I really like that story, and I really like, having that playground there to play with. It was very addicting when I first started using it, going on there, fucking with someone's drawing or someone's whatever. It just seemed like the fun thing to do. We're here on the internet, and no one can stop me, so why not? Why not be a little asshole about
yeah,
it?
it got kind of crazy.
Right? How did things end up changing with that or progressing with that?
So actually the start of it, so when I launched it, I thought, okay, let me just DM a couple of people about it and see if like anybody's interested. I had this app that would notify me whenever somebody painted on it. Like for the first 2 weeks, towards the end of May, it kind of like died down. Like I stopped receiving notifications one day, and then I was actually in the States. Yeah, I was in San Francisco at the time. And I remember my phone hadn't like beeped for the whole day. And I thought like, well, like nobody's using it. And then I came back to my hotel room, and then I opened the site, and I remember seeing just a ton of drawings on there. And I was like, my immediate thought was like, well, did somebody hack it, or like, what the fuck is going on? And then I realized that it was being shared on Twitter and Reddit. And so yeah, like for that month, it was pretty crazy. I was like checking it every hour or so, and some of the stuff that was happening, it was just so much fun to like open it, and then something completely new would be on there. And I mean, that still happens to this day, but it doesn't change as fast as it did in that like first month. It was like June was like the month where it had the most usage. So like leading on from there, like I did a couple talks that year, Bitcoin conference in Lisbon, and I was in the Chaincode Labs Lightning Week in New York. It was October 2017, and yeah, it was that summer that I decided that I wanted to just focus on Lightning and Bitcoin only, and I wanted to pursue this idea of building games with Lightning. So that's when like Koala Studios started.
So I definitely want to get into gaming on Lightning and a lot of the ideas that I think are being kind of started there and developed there. Like a lot of the ones that I kept seeing at the Lightning conference, I find very fascinating. But I want to take a step back here. You had started Satoshi's Place and you had that going. While you had that going, during June or whatever, do you think you had, a nice little bit of beer money from that little experiment there?
Yeah, a couple of beers, probably a bunch of pints, let's say, maybe a barrel.
Okay, gotcha. But would you say that it was a thing that actually generated revenue in some sense, or was it just kind of pennies at the end of the day?
It wasn't sustainable. Like it wasn't. I could make a job out of it. I mean, one thing. So I had a very laissez-faire attitude towards the project in general. Like I just didn't want to change things, and I think the only thing I changed was once I put a dick counter that was fake, because everybody was just painting dicks on it, and I thought it'd be funny just to troll people with a random number. That was like the only thing that I changed pretty much. So I don't know, like looking back, maybe I could have tried to like evolve it and change stuff, but to be honest, so the whole project, it wasn't only like to come up with something so that people could experiment, but it was also like I wanted to see if I could run it on a single board computer. So it wasn't a Raspberry Pi, but it was an Odroid XU something 12, which is basically like a Raspberry Pi. It was running it, like the node was running on that device. I was pretty impressed, but there were performance issues and stuff, and like part of like the whole fun of it on my end was dealing with all that stuff and figuring things out. But yeah, I wouldn't say it was really like a sustainable revenue. So my goal was always just to keep that thing running and have it there so that anybody that like onboards into Lightning, spend one Satoshi to draw a single pixel and then get an immediate feedback to see that like, yeah, okay, my wallet's working.
So what did you end up doing after that project? You had that going, were you doing anything else related to Bitcoin and Lightning? You said you went to the Chaincode Labs residency. Do you want to tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so that was a 1 week long residency where there was a bunch of Lightning developer people there, and we hosted a couple of talks during the week, and we mentored a couple of people who, did some projects. So like Lightning Jewel came out of there, Gerhard's Lightning project as well came out of there, and a couple of others. It feels like really early days now, but I think that was the first ever Lightning Residency that was hosted. Oh, so at the Residency, I was speaking to Jack Mahlers, who was one of the other mentors, and he told me that afterwards he was going to go to a park to play chess against somebody, and I was like, huh, like just like that, like random people. And then he said, yeah, like, we got talking, and he said, it'd be really cool to have a game where you can wager Satoshis on a game of chess. And so that was basically what inspired the Koala Studio project to build Lightning Chess. And Andre Neves, who was my co-founder, we worked on it together. He also came from the Residency. Basically, him and I, we built this game that, allowed you to play a game of chess, and you could wager some Satoshis, and you could also, there's a couple of other features, like you could pay the other player to undo a move, or you could pay him to extend the timer. That was probably my focus for a good part of like 6 to 8 months.
I'm trying to understand what underlying thread here, because it seems that the first project you did, Satoshi's Place, was a bit of a game. It's not, the most complicated game ever, but it was like a very basic game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And chess is a game of sorts, and you've obviously gone on to do other kind of more complicated games. What about games in general kind of do you find interesting, and is there a history in your life of playing these sorts of games?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up playing games. I grew up in Asia, and games were just everywhere, and they were so cheap. And so, yeah, I mean, I've always had an interest in playing games. And I think specifically for Lightning, I just see it as a very obvious use case, because it enables permissionless innovation, enables people around the world to interact, it enables micropayments. To me, it's obvious. I think it's just a matter of time until we see something that just becomes a hit and sees a lot of success as a Lightning game. I just think there needs to be like just iteration on it, and there's a bunch of projects now working on it, which are really exciting. I think 2020 is going to be quite an exciting year for that. But yeah, I mean, gaming in general is a huge industry. I think like esports has like surpassed a lot of entertainment, and or it's like one of the biggest industries in the entertainment industry.
Do you see there being kind of interesting dynamics adding Lightning to a game? For example, I'm playing Fallout 4 again for some reason. Could you just throw Lightning at that and make it a different or better game? Or is there a specific game that you need to make in order to make Lightning suit it, really well?
Yeah, I wouldn't say you could just throw it on there. So the way I see it is, it's similar to why people switch between an iPhone and an Android. Like in my mind, the alternative has to be like the kind of colloquial like 10x better. So you as a user won't switch over if there's like a good enough reason for you to do so. For the same reason that we're not all just gonna switch browser or the internet itself. So basically, like, I see that Lightning has to fulfill a role. There's no real alternative for it. And I think the answer for that is micropayments, just like fast micropayments. I think that's just like not possible. There's no alternative for that. And the other thing is Bitcoin and Lightning in general is just like the permissionlessness of it. So it's just the fact that some 17-year-old in Indonesia can build a game, and I don't know what the game is, but he can just build it and then adds Lightning payments or Bitcoin payments on it, and then just be received like without an intermediary. I think in terms of mechanics, there's a couple of interesting things, like different interactions that you can have between players, not only players, but with spectators as well. But I think that aspect of things, that there just needs to be innovation on that side. I mean, it's one of those things that it has to come up with a cool new way to use it, because otherwise, to me, it's just the permissionless nature of it that matters.
It sounds like there is a bit of a contrast between, a AAA studio and a 17-year-old kid in Indonesia that's, starting their first app or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the AAA studio doesn't really have an incentive to switch. So if you're trying to replace it just as a means of payment, then they're not going to do it, because many times it's the platform they're on, like Google Pay or Apple or the place PlayStation or Steam, they all have their own different payment systems that lock the users in, as well as they have the distribution channels. So, well, those are like the two challenges there. So yeah, they don't have much incentive to like switch. But like an indie gamer, on the other hand, like a smaller indie gamer, like if he wants to implement or like monetize his game in some unique way, then Lightning and Bitcoin is that way that he can just like implement. Similar to like how people put BTC Pay, use BTC Pay for merchants. You know, there are alternatives. In certain cases, those alternatives just don't work. Like for a 17-year-old, it's regulation. Like he's not allowed to have a bank account or whatever. And Bitcoin just doesn't care about that. It might be something else. It might be, you know, religious application in Islam, in an Islamic country, or it might be like a pornographic game or whatever. You know, yeah, I think it's hard to say that it won't be one of those use cases, but it might be something else. I can't think of right now, but like if somebody much more creative than I am can come up with a cool new application for it.
Okay, could the activities of like the indie studios kind of making this maybe a successful thing to do to add Lightning Bitcoin support and be able to collect, you know, X amount of revenue off of doing that, and oh my God, it's so much better than whatever. Do you think you could one day foresee someone like Rockstar, you know, we're going to bring out Bitcoin Lightning Shark cards, whatever, and having something like that happen? Or do you think, like you were saying, like the incentives are just probably never going to be there for the large studios to do that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be some like small, completely unknown like group of people who are going to build this thing, and it's going to catch the attention of the bigger players. Now, whether or not they jump in on it, I don't know. Like, I think if you see like Lightning and Bitcoin as its own kind of niche that has the potential to grow a lot, then perhaps like it needs to grow enough for those studios, for it to be justified for those studios to come in, right? But yeah, I think the probability is much more likely that, you know, it'll be something like a small studio like Donner Labs or something that comes in and you know, replaces the traditional model.
So let's get back to kind of your history here. So after Lightning Chess, what else are we doing here?
Yeah, so the big thing last year for me was I got married. That was the biggest thing that came up. So with Lightning Chess, we made a decision to try and fundraise, and we spent about like 3 to 4 months doing that, and then it got to a point where my marriage was coming up, and I just had too much going on, and it just reached an inflection point for me where I just had to make a decision and take a step back so I could focus on my marriage and just like readjust. So it was around that time where Alex Leishman, CEO of River Financial, approached me and asked if I would like to join them. I've been with River since June last year.
Do you want to briefly tell listeners what River is?
Yeah, so River is a brokerage. Right now, US only, supported states. We are a Bitcoin only brokerage with Lightning support, so you can deposit and withdraw with Lightning as well as on-chain. Our focus is just on providing the best user experience for the Bitcoin investor. We offer the ability to set up recurring automated buys, as well as we have a feature that allows you to track your cost basis to calculate your capital gains tax. Yeah, so we're moving really quickly.
The one downside that I see is they're not operating quite yet in the state that I'm in, so I've been unable to try out River. I signed up for like early users thing, and I was not able to use it, sadly. So I don't really have an opinion quite yet. I would typically try to have an opinion on these sorts of things. But okay. And so that's kind of just been your life, and you haven't really had time to do other Lightning projects. Is that right?
Yeah, I've just been focusing on that for now.
Do you have any kind of favorite Lightning app? It doesn't have to be a game exactly, just any kind of Lightning app that you like.
Ooh, Lightning app. I think I use a lot of different Lightning apps, a lot of different wallets, and I don't want to like lessen any of them since we're also talking about games. I think one of the games that I was really impressed recently was Bitcoin Bounty Hunts by Donner Labs. It's a FPS prototype they built with Lightning. We can talk about that if you want.
Sure. Let's go ahead and go into more detail.
Yeah, so the idea is that when you install the game, it installs an LND nodes in the back with Neutrino, and it's completely seamless for the user. And you install it through Steam. When you join a game, you're basically like inside a game shooting other people and stuff. But the interesting thing was that you have advertisers that can come in and sponsor a game, and usually like you'll see like posters inside the game as you're running around, or you'll see a message. The money that they give for sponsorship gets dropped as like bounty boxes around the arena. So the idea is that as you're running around, you can pick up these boxes and collect Satoshi essentially. Now the mechanism is that as you collect boxes, you build up this stack of Satoshis that's kind of like, it's not yours yet, I don't know, temporary, let's say. And then the longer you live, the more of those Satoshis get transferred to your wallet. So I just really like the idea that has been able to kind of like create a non-custodial experience and kind of merge the incentive of players to play and advertisers to kind of come in with money to feed those players.
Do you see in the future at some point there being dedicated teenagers that make a full-time income playing video games in this fashion?
I don't know, but one of the playtests we did, so I've been participating in the playtest. I highly encourage anybody who's interested in this kind of like Lightning gaming stuff to join like the Discord chats and stuff. And so Donner Labs has a Discord chat for this Bitcoin bounty hunt game. So one of the playtests we did, I think the top player, we played like for like 3 hours or something in and out. And the top player earned like 40,000 sats or something like that. I think I can't remember, but I remember at the time, like we calculated that it was about $8. I think $8 is more than like the minimum wage in a lot of third world countries right now. I think Venezuela is one of them. Yeah, I mean, potentially could be a reality.
Yeah, that sounds a lot better to me. Like I'm, trying to think about, if I was a teenage kid or something, would I want to have to go get sponsors and do all this work, or would I want to just play a game directly, not even have to have people watching me? I'm just playing a game and beating other people. So my raw skill is paying me in Bitcoin, and I don't need any outside people. I think that there's a lot of value and power in that.
Well, right now, today, there's already kids who make a living out of being professional esports players, right? So in their teens, they'll get scouted, and then they'll join a group that just like trains all day eventually, to join a competition. And I think it was Dota last year, the grand prize was like more than $10 million for a team of 5 or 6, I think. I think like each player took more than $1 million in prize money. And these are like 18-year-olds or less, I think. I don't know. So I think the reality is here now. It's just that, right now we're just seeing kind of like that top tier creme de la creme. But I think much like, here in Europe, like the football leagues, like you still have like other competitions other than the Champions League or whatever, where players make a living out of it, right? So with gaming, it might be that way. It might be that you don't need to be like in the top 1 percentile of players. You might still make a living as a kind of like semi-pro player. And I see Bitcoin and Lightning being kind of like the digital native money as a potential enabler of that.
Do you find it kind of, not likely, but I mean, do you find it kind of possible, or that, teenagers or kids younger than being teenagers growing up with Bitcoin just being a thing will see it just being far more natural than anyone, even in their 30s or 20s now?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that's the other interesting side of gaming, looking at gaming, is because this new generation, like the younger generation, they're the guys who are going to get it. Like we're going to be like the old folks that remember the days when Bitcoin was a thing and we used to go to conferences for it. Because if hyper-Bitcoinization happens, or some flavor of that, where Bitcoin becomes just a normal day-to-day thing, then it's not going to be something that you kind of talk about as a big deal anymore. It's kind of, I don't know, I think it's kind of sad to think that perhaps in the future, when it makes it, then it becomes kind of, of course it's Bitcoin. Like, what do you mean it's Bitcoin,
Absolutely. I definitely see myself being the grandpa that's still there talking about Bitcoin, though. Just like, in my day, we had Bitcoin.
I remember check with your ex. Hey, hey, hey.
I mean, I'm just trying to build a picture of the future here. In my eyes, I generally see it being far easier for any random person on the planet to just, start making money, essentially, similar to the Google Stadia project where you can play games in the cloud that, some kid in some, third world country can, they don't necessarily have a gaming GPU locally. How different is gaming going to be in 10 to 15 years? How grizzled are we going to be by that time?
Sorry, you mean in terms of technology and hardware?
I mean, yeah, and just how different the third world will become. Because, looking at today, a lot of the third world is leapfrogging over the kind of middle technology. An example that I see quite a bit is how a lot of places in the world are skipping over landline phones and going straight to cell phones because cell phones became far more prevalent in a short period of time than landlines were
Oh,
able to kind of become prevalent.
yeah.
Do you see something similar happening with, things like Bitcoin and content creation and stuff like that?
With Bitcoin, I just see it as kids growing up and just getting used to transferring value between them with digitally with Bitcoin. I see that as like a very likely thing and probably already happening. In terms of gaming, I don't know. I keep thinking like of the gaming cafes where like I was in the Philippines once and I walked into a gaming cafe and like there was all these kids playing Counter Strike and it had been probably like 6 years since I had played Counter Strike, and I thought, yeah, I can do this, and I got completely murdered. It was just crazy like how good these kids were. I think that's still happening, although perhaps mobile gaming has probably become way more of a thing now. Thing you mentioned about Stadia, I haven't actually used it. I have a friend who has it, and yeah, I don't know if it's actually like living up to the promise of like low latency gaming and stuff like that. So, because for some of that competitive, some of those competitive sports, that's kind of a big deal. And in terms of putting more hardware in the cloud, like I don't know, like I mean, I say that I haven't been working on Lightning lately. Well, part of the reason was like in the last like 3 months, one of the things that I was doing was actually moving a lot of the stuff that I have on the cloud into my own self-hosted hardware, and also upgrading the Satoshi's Place nodes because it was starting to struggle on that like single board computer, and just because it's old. Like if I had got like a Raspberry Pi 4 or a Rock chip or something like that, it would have been fine. But I got to the point where I have a couple of applications out. I just wanted to have my own like personal like Amazon cloud service. I think like that kind of is pretty common for developers. Let's maybe not like for end consumers, but a developer might want to have their own personal Amazon AWS that they can like deploy applications on, right? If you care at all about self sovereignty and but even cost, like I'm actually like saving money by running my own infrastructure, and it's really not that much of a big deal. It's not like I have like racks of servers at home. I'm just using like an Intel NUC, the i5 i7 processor, 16 gigs RAM and like a bunch of hard disk memory, and I'm able to run Bitcoin full node, a bunch of Lightning nodes. I'm able to run the Satoshi's Place application, a couple of other things. I also run Nextcloud and Rocket Chat, and basically use it as like my experimentational thing. So I'm talking about this because I don't know if this like whole like everything in the cloud thing is gonna happen, or if it's, well, I don't think it's a good idea. I think maybe in the next decades or so we'll start to see like more of a push of developers building tooling around things that help you remain self-sovereign. So I don't know if I'm going off on a tangent here, but like the thing about Google Stadia and like not owning the games and stuff, like I don't know, like maybe that's the case, but it'll be interesting to see how that develops.
So just to quickly comment on Stadia, I've never used Stadia, but I think in like 2012, 2013, there was like a precursor called On Live that since
Yeah,
shut down.
yeah, yeah.
I actually liked the service. I mean, I was a gaming pleb back then. Like, I had a really terrible computer, and so I had to just deal with whatever I had. So it was better than nothing. And I think I was playing Deus Ex, pretty decent, and I kind of like it. But what I'm taking away from your answer is that not that things will go this way, but things should kind of go in a more, the way that I was thinking about it was a kind of BTC Pay server kind of approach where you have this kind of toolbox of open source things. Depending on what you want, you can turn this on, turn that on, and be able to kind of launch all these services for yourself without needing to rely on third parties.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for entertainment, maybe it's not as important, but I would say like for your own data and definitely for money, it's really important. Although now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder if there's going to be like a torrent-like service that you can rent out like high-powered GPUs that run the game remotely, and then you can just connect in and play like that. um, because I think with Lightning and Bitcoin, the big thing about it is just being able to trade online, and something like this would actually be an interesting use case. And we're already starting to see like some examples. I think Andre launched something recently where you can rent out like some like cloud service node, or which I don't know if he hosts or not, but this idea that you can kind of like rent something like metered starts to make a lot more sense when you have like digitally native money like Bitcoin and Lightning. So I would expect that could be like the case in the future. Yeah.
And I think I'm going to try to go for more of a speed round here. We have about maybe 5 minutes to go here before the end of the show. Kind of talking about Lightning generally here. Where do you see it going in the short term, or where do you see the biggest changes happening? Do you see it being kind of more use cases? Do you see the current use cases that we have getting stronger and more refined? Where do you see, the whole kind of ecosystem going here?
I mean, as I said, I haven't been like paying too much attention to some of the developments. I did upgrade Satoshi's Places the C Lightning node recently to support the new version that supports multi-part payments. So I guess that's just gonna, the development churn of just working through these innovations that we've been talking about for the last year or two. I think Schnorr is probably like the biggest. Yeah, Schnorr and Taproot are probably like the biggest like Bitcoin related thing that will have repercussions in Lightning as well, because then we'll be able to do L2 and like a bunch of other really cool things. That's on the tech side of things. On the actual like applications, gaming, as we've spoken about, there was this prototype of like chat over Lightning, which I thought was really interesting recently. It just kind of like reminded me of like, I mean, I don't use IRC nowadays. I know a lot of Bitcoin developers do, but back in the day I used to, and I just kind of like imagine, wow, like if you can do like IRC with money, that would be interesting. Because yeah, I wonder if that's something that's possible with Lightning, or if it will become a use case. Because if we can kind of like have a chat protocol on Lightning, then yeah, I mean I think that's something the world needs, because it will improve the signal to noise ratio on our communications. Yeah, in terms of applications, I think I'm looking forward to what Jack Ma is coming out with this year. And yeah, I think I can't think of anything else, but there's like a ton of stuff happening. Yeah.
Do you see Bitcoin as being able to really change the world without Lightning? Let's say Lightning just failed tomorrow. Would Bitcoin be able to deliver on the overall promise without Lightning?
Well, if not Lightning, then it would be something else. Yeah, like it would still work as a settlement system, which might be the case anyway. But I think Lightning just opens up a lot more possibilities, because yeah, with Bitcoin, you could still potentially have kind of like was it Hal Finney that said like banking with Bitcoin, where like settlement between banks and institutions happens with Bitcoin, but then smaller amounts get transacted in like a custodial system. I think the thing with Lightning is that it gives us a way to do that without the custodial part. So yeah, it would still work, but it would be like half as good, maybe.
Okay, and I think maybe my final question would be, if you could snap your fingers or wave a magic wand and improve Bitcoin/Lightning or create an app, game, whatever, whatever you wanted, what would you do and why?
Snap my fingers. Yeah, I think it would be Schnorr and Taproot. Obviously, it's going to take its time, and that's perfectly fine. But if I could magically snap my fingers and get us to work through the review process and everything much quicker, then I would do that. Without compromising security, of course.
All right, man. I really appreciate you chatting with me today. Do you want to let the listeners know how they can find you on the internets?
Yeah, so I'm Lightning Koala with a 0 instead of an O on Twitter. You can visit satoshi.place for some Lightning fun, and river.financial if you're in the United States on some of our supported states. You can sign up, start sacking sats.
I really appreciate you joining me on the Lightning Junkies podcast, Mr. Koala.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, man.
Boom. That was the 22nd episode of the Lightning Junkies podcast. What did you think about this week's episode? Did you enjoy it? Did you learn anything? Was your imagination inspired and pushed to heights that you had not known existed previously? Are you bullish AF, bro? If this podcast has improved your life, then please consider supporting the podcast. You can do so via Bitcoin or Bitcoin over Lightning at crowdfund.lightningjunkies.net. There are also other ways to support the podcast, such as signing up for SparkSwap or Fold app via my link in the show notes. You can also tip me on tipping.me or listening to the podcast via LNCast.com. For now, I'm going to go ahead and end the show without too much more talking on my part. There are some surprises coming, so I want to have time to go ahead and work on those. For now, I will see all you beautiful, beautiful people, Bitcoiners or not. I will see all of you on the Lightning Network.